The amphitheatre buzzed with a quiet energy, the kind that accompanied moments of great significance. Built into the mountain's embrace, the space was both open to the sky and steeped in history. Waterfalls cascaded down the cliffs on either side, their crystalline flow catching the light of the ethereal sun. Rows of finely dressed elves filled the tiers, their hushed voices blending with the sound of the falls. At the heart of it all, the graduates stood in a proud line, their ceremonial robes glowing faintly with magical runes. Clora was among them, her posture steady, her expression serene but alert. Her presence, as always, was a mix of quiet determination and a readiness to rise to any challenge. Gunnar stood at the base of the amphitheatre, his arms crossed, his stance relaxed but deliberate. He was positioned just far enough to remain out of the spotlight, blending into the shadowed edge of the ceremony. Aeliana had offered him a place among the command staff, a gesture of respect, but he had politely declined. "This is Clora's moment," he had said, "not mine." Aeliana had nodded, her expression understanding. Now she stood with the other commanders, her presence graceful and commanding as she observed the proceedings. Her gaze occasionally flickered to where Gunnar stood, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Gunnar shifted his weight slightly, his cybernetic arm glinting faintly in the sunlight. He scanned the crowd briefly before his gaze settled on Clora. She looked composed, her robes draped elegantly over her shoulders, the runes glowing brighter as the ceremony progressed. Omega, her spirit animal, sat at her side, his silver-grey fur catching the light like liquid moonlight. He felt a flicker of pride, sharp and undeniable. She had come so far, rising to every challenge, pushing past every doubt. This wasn't just her graduation, it was a testament to her strength, her resilience, and her place as an alpha. The High Chancellor of the Elven War College stepped forward, his ornate robes trailing behind him as he addressed the crowd. His voice carried with a natural authority, amplified by the enchantments woven into the amphitheatre. Today we honour not only the achievements of these graduates, but the bridges they represent between worlds. They are the future of Alfheim, the guardians of its legacy, and the architects of its hope. As the Chancellor spoke, the graduates stepped forward one by one to receive their ceremonial staffs. Each staff was unique, crafted to reflect the individual's bond with Alfheim and their journey through its teachings. When Clora's name was called, the amphitheatre stilled. She stepped forward with calm confidence, Omega rising to walk beside her. The Chancellor handed her the Staff of Light, a shimmering weapon and tool imbued with ancient magic. Its surface glowed as she touched it, reacting to her presence with a soft pulse of light. "Clora Faelan," the Chancellor said, his voice carrying reverence. "The first human to complete the Elven War College. You are a bridge between worlds, a symbol of unity and strength. Carry this staff with honour, for it is a reflection of the light you bring to all you touch." Clora inclined her head respectfully, accepting the staff with steady hands. As she turned to face the crowd, a ripple of applause swept through the amphitheatre, growing into a resounding cheer. From his place at the edge of the ceremony, Gunnar felt the surge of pride swell again, tempered by the familiar weight of responsibility. He didn't cheer, didn't move, he simply watched, his gaze steady as Clora stood at the centre of it all, radiant and strong. When her eyes found his in the crowd, she gave the faintest nod, her lips curving into a small, genuine smile. It was a moment just between them, a silent acknowledgement of everything they'd been through and everything still to come. Aeliana's gaze flicked toward Gunnar again, her expression soft but knowing. She didn't call attention to him, didn't interrupt the moment. Instead, she returned her focus to Clora, her pride evident. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Gunnar lingered at the edge of the amphitheatre. Clora approached him, her staff of light resting lightly in her hand, Omega padding beside her. "Decided to stay out of the spotlight?" she teased, her hazel eyes gleaming with humor. Didn't want to steal your thunder, Gunnar replied, his smirk faint but warm. You earned this. Her smile softened, and she shifted the staff slightly, glancing down at it. I wouldn't have made it here without you. You made it because of who you are, Gunnar said firmly. I just pointed you in the right direction. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Still, thank you. For everything. Gunnar rested a hand briefly on her shoulder, his grip steady. You did good, Clora. And you're just getting started. As she stepped back to rejoin the other graduates, Aeliana approached, her expression serene but reflective. You must be proud, she said softly. Always, Gunnar replied, his voice low. But it's her pride that matters today. Aeliana smiled faintly, her gaze following Clora, and she carries it well. The last cheers of Clora's graduation ceremony was still fading into the mountain air when the messenger appeared. He was young, dressed in simple but formal robes, his expression tight with urgency. He moved through the dispersing crowd with purpose, his steps unyielding until he reached Aeliana. Guardian Vale, he said, bowing low and extending a scroll sealed with a sigil, unfamiliar to Gunnar. A summons from the High Council of the Guardians. Aeliana's serene expression faltered, a rare flicker of unease passing over her features. She accepted the scroll with steady hands, her eyes scanning the elegant script quickly. The message was brief and direct, offering no explanations. You are to come at once, Guardian Vale. Bring the humans with you. Aeliana's fingers tightened around the parchment as her gaze lifted to meet Gunnar's. This is unprecedented. What's it say? Gunnar asked, his tone steady, though his sharp blue eye betrayed a flicker of suspicion. They want us. Now, Aeliana replied, her voice low but tense, and they want you and Clora to come with me. Clora stepped forward, her grip firm on the staff of light. Why? What's going on? I don't know, Aeliana admitted, her calm demeanor fraying slightly at the edges. I have never been summoned like this before. Gunnar's jaw tightened. Then we better not keep them waiting. The journey to the council's chambers was swift and silent, the tension between them growing with each passing step. The path led deep into the heart of Alfheim, through corridors of glowing crystal and past sentries whose expressions betrayed nothing. Even the air seemed heavier here, charged with an unseen energy. When they arrived, they were greeted by a small contingent of guards clad in gleaming ceremonial armor. Their leader, a tall elf with a cold demeanor, gestured for them to halt. Guardian Vale, he said, his tone formal but clipped. You are to proceed to the waiting chambers. The humans and their companion will be taken elsewhere. Aeliana frowned, stepping forward slightly. Elsewhere? Where are you taking them? To a secure holding room, the guard replied without hesitation. It is the council's directive. Gunnar's posture stiffened, his cybernetic fingers flexing slightly. Holding room? He repeated, his voice edged with suspicion. We're not criminals. This is not a matter for debate, the guard said firmly. You will comply, or the council will consider it a refusal of their summons. Aeliana turned to Gunnar, her expression unreadable but her tone steady. Do as they ask, for now. Gunnar exchanged a glance with Clora, who nodded reluctantly. With a slight gesture, he indicated for Alpha to follow, the massive wolf padding silently at his side. Fine, he said, his tone clipped. Lead the way. The guards escorted Gunnar, Clora, and Omega through a series of winding corridors, each narrower and more dimly lit than the last. The room they finally entered was small and austere, its stone walls etched with faint runes that hummed with magical energy. A single bench lined one wall, and there were no windows or visible exits beyond the door through which they had come. You are to remain here until summoned, the guard said curtly. Do not attempt to leave. The door shut behind them with a resounding thud, the faint click of a lock echoing in the silence. Clora crossed her arms, her hazel eyes scanning the room warily. This feels wrong. Gunnar leaned against the wall, his expression dark. That's because it is. Omega growled softly, pacing near the door. The runes on the walls seemed to pulse faintly, responding to the tension in the room. Gunnar reached down to run a hand over the wolf's head, his own thoughts churning. We'll play along for now, he said quietly. But the second this smells like a trap, we're getting out. Council or no council. Meanwhile, Aeliana was led to a different chamber, a quiet, dimly lit space furnished only with a single chair and a small table. She sat down, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her mind racing despite her calm exterior. The council's summons had been abrupt, and their secrecy was unnerving. In all her centuries as a guardian, she had never been called in such a manner, and the fact that Gunnar and Clora had been dragged into it only deepened her unease. She glanced toward the door, half expecting someone to enter to explain, to offer clarity, but the chamber remained silent, the weight of anticipation pressing down on her like a stone. The heavy oak doors of the High Council chamber swung open with a low creak. A guard stepped forward, his polished armor glinting faintly under the chamber's magical glow. "Gunnar, Clora," he announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "The council will see you now." Gunnar exchanged a glance with Clora, his jaw tightening. He adjusted the strap of his pack and rested a hand briefly on Omega's head before stepping forward. Clora followed, her staff of light gripped tightly in her hand, her expression calm but alert. As they entered the chamber, the air seemed to shift. The room was vast, its domed ceiling inscribed with intricate runes that pulsed faintly with energy. 7 figures sat in a semicircle, their features obscured by the glow of their elevated seats. Their presence was as commanding as it was unnerving. "Gunnar, Clora Faelan," the central figure began, his voice deep and resonant. "You stand before the High Council of the Guardians. Your actions, and those of Guardian Vale, have raised grave concerns regarding the balance between realms." Gunnar inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "We're here to answer any questions you've got." The council member to the left, a woman with an icy demeanor, leaned forward slightly. "You've traversed multiple realms under Aeliana's guidance, portals opened by her hand. How do you justify this breach of her oath?" Gunnar's voice was steady. Every portal she opened, every time she stepped in, it was to maintain the balance, not disrupt it. The Demon King, Ultranacious Eternus, was threatening not just Earth, but every realm connected to it. I stood against him because it was the right thing to do, but I couldn't have done it without her help. "You claim the destruction of the Demon King maintained balance?" the central figure asked. "How can you be certain it didn't tip the scales further?" "Because I saw the chaos he brought with my own eyes," Gunnar said, his voice hardening. "He wasn't just conquering realms, he was ripping apart their very foundations. If he hadn't been stopped, none of us would be standing here right now." Clora stepped forward, her hazel eyes sharp. "Aeliana hasn't broken her oath. She's honored it in every way that matters. Teaching me, guiding me. It wasn't interference. It was preparation. The War College accepted me because I proved I could stand with them, not because of Aeliana." The council's gaze shifted toward her, their silence heavy. Finally, the woman on the left spoke again. "And yet, you were taught by her, a guardian sworn to neutrality. Is that not a contradiction?" Clora's grip tightened on her staff, but her voice remained steady. "No, she gave me tools, but I've made my own choices. Just like Gunnar, just like Echo Division. She's guided us, not manipulated us." Another council member, his tone colder than the others, addressed Gunnar. "And the proposal for a gateway between Earth and Alfheim? Surely you understand the risk such a connection poses." "I do," Gunnar admitted. "But I also understand the risk of not having it. The Black Dawn is growing stronger every day. If we don't work together, they'll tear us apart one realm at a time. The gateway isn't about convenience, it's about survival. The central figure's gaze lingered on Gunnar, unreadable. And you believe your actions align with the greater good? I believe my actions align with keeping the balance, Gunnar said firmly. Same as Aeliana's. The council fell silent, their deliberation unspoken but palpable. Finally, the central figure spoke again. Your statements have been noted. You will now return to the holding chamber. Gunnar nodded, his gaze steady. Understood. As Gunnar and Clora were escorted out, Aeliana was summoned into the chamber. The weight of their words and the council's judgment loomed over her as she stepped forward, her staff held lightly but with purpose. The room felt colder now, the scrutiny of the guardians bearing down on her. Guardian Vale, the central figure intoned, you stand accused of violating your oath of non-interference. Your actions, as recounted by these humans, suggest a pattern of deviation. Teaching Clora Faelan, granting access to the War College, sharing knowledge, opening portals. How do you plead? Aeliana took a deep breath, her voice calm but resolute. I plead only that my actions were guided by necessity and a commitment to the balance I am sworn to uphold. If I have overstepped, it was not for personal gain, but for the preservation of all realms. The council leaned in, their questions sharper now. Aeliana's defense would be a test, not just of her wisdom, but of her unshakable belief in the path she had chosen. The chamber was silent except for the faint hum of the runes etched into its walls. Aeliana stood tall, her hands clasping the staff lightly. Her piercing blue eyes scanned the semicircle of guardians seated before her, their expressions unreadable but weighted with judgment. Guardian Vale, the central figure said, his voice measured. You are accused of interfering in matters beyond your station. You have crossed realms, shared forbidden knowledge, and aided mortals in battles that should not concern you. Explain yourself. Aeliana's gaze sharpened, her voice calm but with a steel edge beneath it. I interfered, as you call it, because there was no choice. The balance we are sworn to protect was crumbling. I fought the Demon King, Ultranacious Eternus, because he threatened not just one realm but all realms. And when I fell to earth broken and vulnerable, it was Gunnar who saved me. The mention of Gunnar's name caused a ripple among the council. The central figure's tone cooled. A mortal. A mortal, Aeliana repeated firmly, who stood where no guardian dared to. While we watched from our towers and whispered of neutrality, he faced the Demon King alone. He lost his arm, his eye, nearly his life. And in doing so, he restored the balance we claim to serve. The guardians exchanged glances, their expressions tense. Aeliana stepped forward slightly, her voice rising. And where were we, Council? Where were the guardians when Nethoria fell to darkness? When the Demon King manipulated its destruction, leaving its people scattered and its lands sealed? I have seen the evidence with my own eyes. The Demon King's corruption reached far beyond what we acknowledged. And yet, we stood idle. The guardian to the left, a stern-faced woman, leaned forward. You accuse us of negligence, Guardian Vale. I accuse us of hubris, Aeliana shot back, of believing that inaction is the same as neutrality. While we debated and delayed, mortals like Gunnar and his pack fought to hold the line. And now, with the Black Dawn rising, that line is crumbling. Aeliana turned, pacing slowly before the semicircle as her words gained momentum. The Black Dawn isn't just a threat to Earth. Their influence grows with each passing day, their reach extending into realms we once believed untouchable. The Pack, Echo Division, has been fighting them tirelessly, but they are losing ground. And now, even Ulfheim feels the pressure. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the council. Or have you not noticed the skirmishes breaking out along your borders, the incursions that grow bolder, more frequent? A murmur passed through the Guardians. The central figure raised a hand to silence them, his tone wary. You bring accusations, but where is your proof? The proof is in the lives lost, Aeliana replied sharply. In the reports from your own sentries who face increasing conflict while you debate doctrine. The Black Dawn doesn't care about our oaths or our neutrality. They care about power, and they are gaining it while we sit idle. Aeliana's voice softened but remained resolute. The realms are connected, whether we like it or not. When one falls, the ripple affects us all. That is why I taught Clora, why I opened portals for Gunnar, why I proposed the gateway. Not to interfere, but to prepare. To create a foundation for cooperation before it's too late. The stern-faced woman leaned back, her expression unreadable. And you believe these mortals capable of maintaining balance? I believe they already have, Aeliana said, and I believe they will continue to, if we allow them the means to succeed. Gunnar's fight against the Demon King, Clora's rise as Alpha, their battle against the Black Dawn. They are doing what we should have done long ago. She stepped back to the center of the chamber, her gaze steady. I do not deny my actions. If I have violated my oath, it was because the alternative was to watch the balance crumble while we stood by. And I will not apologize for choosing to act. The chamber fell silent, the weight of Aeliana's words settling over the council like a storm cloud. The central figure leaned forward slightly, his expression inscrutable. Your arguments are noted, Guardian Vale, he said finally. You will return to your chamber while we deliberate. Aeliana inclined her head, her composure unbroken, and turned to leave. As the heavy doors closed behind her, the tension in the air lingered like a held breath. In the small holding room, Gunnar and Clora exchanged glances as Aeliana entered. Gunnar straightened, his voice low but steady. How bad? Aeliana let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. They're listening, but whether they'll act, that's another matter. The massive doors of the council chamber opened once more, the echo reverberating like a thunderclap. A guard stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he addressed the holding room. The council has summoned you back. Gunnar exchanged a glance with Clora, his jaw tightening. Omega stirred at her side, sensing the tension. Aeliana, who had remained silent since rejoining them, rose gracefully to her feet, her staff lightly tapping the stone floor. Together they entered the chamber, the weight of the moment settling heavily on their shoulders. The council's semicircle loomed before them, their expressions unreadable though the air was thick with tension. At the centre sat the senior council member, an elder elf with silver hair and eyes as sharp as a blade. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but edged with the gravity of the situation. We find ourselves at an impasse, he began. The question before us is not merely one of rules or traditions. It is one of purpose. Why should Alfheim, and by extension this council, risk involvement with Earth? Convince us. Aeliana stepped forward, her movements deliberate, her voice steady but laced with growing emotion. Why should you risk involvement? Because we are already involved. Every battle fought on Earth reverberates through the realms. Every loss weakens the barriers that keep darkness at bay. She turned slowly, addressing the entire council. You ask why Alfheim should act, but I ask you this. What does it mean to be a guardian if we simply sit by and watch? When Nythoria fell, we did nothing. When the Demon King rose, we stayed silent. How many more realms must suffer before we acknowledge that inaction is not neutrality, it is complicity? The council shifted uneasily, but Aeliana pressed on, her voice rising. The Black Dawn grows stronger by the day. They are not just Earth's problem. They are a threat to us all. And yet, we debate politics and doctrines while our borders crumble under the weight of their influence. She paused, her gaze piercing. If we do nothing, Alfheim will not remain untouched. The fractures I see among us now will grow into chasms, dividing this realm until it falls, just as Nythoria did. Gunnar stepped forward, his presence commanding but grounded. His voice was calm, deliberate, every word carrying weight. I've seen what happens when you leave mortals to deal with threats like these alone. I fought the Demon King because there was no one else who could, or would. He raised his cybernetic arm slightly, the runes on the engraved dagger glinting faintly. This didn't come cheap, neither did my eye, but I'd do it again because it wasn't just about Earth. The Demon King wasn't content with one realm. He was coming for all of them. Gunnar glanced around the chamber, his blue eyes sharp. You talk about balance, about staying neutral, but balance doesn't keep itself. Someone has to fight for it. Someone has to hold the line. That's what Echo Division does, and that's what Aeliana's been doing. She's not breaking her oath. She's fulfilling it. Clora stepped forward, the staff of light glowing faintly in her hand. She straightened her shoulders, her voice clear and steady despite the intensity of the moment. I am living proof of what collaboration between realms can achieve. When I came to Alfheim, I was an outsider, human, different. But through training and guidance, I've become stronger, not just for myself, but for my pack and for the realms I now serve. She glanced at Aeliana, her voice softening. Aeliana didn't interfere with my path. She showed me what was possible. She gave me the tools to build a bridge between Earth and Alfheim. Isn't that what Guardians are supposed to do? To guide, to protect, to preserve the balance? Clora turned back to the council, her hazel eyes bright with conviction. The future isn't in isolation, it's in unity. If we don't start working together now, there may not be a future to fight for. The senior council member leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Aeliana. You speak passionately, Guardian Vale. But passion alone cannot justify the risk. The balance must be maintained. Aeliana's hands tightened around her staff, and for a moment she was silent. Then she stepped closer, her voice trembling not with fear but with raw emotion. What balance? Where is the balance when realms fall while we debate, when mortals sacrifice everything while we watch from the sidelines? You call yourselves guardians, but what do we guard if not the very fabric of existence? Her voice rose, echoing through the chamber. If the Black Dawn succeeds, it will not be because they were too strong. It will be because we were too weak, too afraid to act. If that is what it means to be a guardian, then perhaps it is this council, not I, that has failed. The room fell into stunned silence, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone present. The senior council member leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. This council will deliberate, he said finally, his voice quieter but no less commanding. You will be summoned when a decision has been reached. Aeliana's eyes narrowed, her composure cracking at the edges. She stepped back toward Gunnar and Clora, her movements sharp, her frustration palpable. Clora caught her gaze and gave a slight nod, silently acknowledging the unspoken understanding passing between them. No, Aeliana said suddenly, her voice ringing with defiance. She turned back to the council, her tone colder now, stripped of the reverence she had once held. There is nothing left to deliberate. You've heard the evidence, you've heard the truth, and yet you still hesitate. The council members stirred uncomfortably, but Aeliana didn't stop. Do you think the Black Dawn will wait for your decision? Do you think Earth, Alfheim, or any realm can afford your endless debates? If you cannot decide, then perhaps we will. The senior council member's eyes flashed with warning. Guardian Vale, you tread dangerous ground. And I will keep treading it, she replied sharply, her voice unwavering. Because someone must. Gunnar stepped forward, his cybernetic arm glinting faintly in the chamber's light. His expression was calm but deadly serious. I've faced worse than this council. I've fought your Demon King, lost more than you can imagine and kept going. If you're not going to help, fine. we'll handle it ourselves, like we always have. Clora stood beside him, her staff of light glowing faintly in her hand. Alfheim will fight, whether you acknowledge it or not. The skirmishes on your borders are proof enough. If this council doesn't act, you risk becoming irrelevant. Just another relic of a time when the Guardians mattered. A murmur passed through the chamber, Guardians shifting uneasily at the pointed words. Aeliana turned back toward Gunnar and Clora, her gaze softening slightly. "Let's go," she said quietly, her tone heavy with resolve. As the three turned to leave, the senior council member's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "If you walk out now, you risk everything, Aeliana." She stopped but didn't turn, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not the one risking everything. You are." The doors of the chamber slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing like a final judgment. Outside the council chamber, Aeliana released a slow breath, her shoulders sagging slightly. Gunnar placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "You did the right thing." Clora nodded, her expression fierce. "We'll figure this out, with or without them." Aeliana straightened, her resolve hardening once more. "If they won't help us, we'll find allies who will. The Black Dawn isn't waiting, and neither are we." With that, the three of them strode away from the council's sanctum, their path uncertain but their purpose clear.
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like, because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon, and remember, once you're in, you're family.